Let's be honest. The term human resources has an image problem. We have ourselves to blame for some of these self-inflicted perceptions wounds. I'll get into this more later, but in short, our thirst for power and control as a path to the cheeriest seat at the table create resentment and frustration in our teams. While we have to own our role in some of those legacy perception issues, the reality is that as a function, we were rarely given the respect equal to our importance in building a successful organization. The field of human resources today is a spectrum. On one side, you have a relic from the days of personnel, defined by words like administrative, reactive, transactional, or less flattering terms. You know which ones. Swing the pendulum on the other direction, and you have a very different function, defined by words including strategic, transformative, proactive, inclusive, embedded, essential. Your views on the field will largely be informed by where you sit on that spectrum. So this is how the book by our guest today begins. In this episode, we will explore resilience, kindness, the future of work, the importance of self-care in HR, the midlife crisis, and much more. Hackers del Talento, el podcast que busca cambiar el juego por lo humano en Iberoamérica. Nuestra tercera temporada está enfocada en ti.
Luchar con determinación por lo que quieres en la vida, ¿no?
Entender por qué te levantás todos los días y vas a determinado lugar o te conectás para desarrollar una tarea. Entender el por qué.
Un equipo que sean coachables.
Una persona que no es capaz de hablar de sus fracasos, o peor, que considera que nunca tuvo fracasos o nunca tuvo fracasos, es una persona en la cual definitivamente no quiero invertir. Porque yo quiero invertir en personas que hayan fracasado muchas veces, porque quiere decir que aprendieron un montón.
Cree en tu talento, tus capacidades, para que seamos parte clave de una región más competitiva, inclusiva, equitativa y próspera, donde juntos pongamos a las personas en el centro del mundo del trabajo.
Nuestra responsabilidad es ayudar a líderes a que conecten su cabeza con su corazón.
Porque es imposible hacer algo o tomar acción sobre una situación o sobre un problema del cual uno no es consciente.
Esperamos que disfrutes esta tercera temporada, porque va a ser una fuente de inspiración, unión, colaboración, aprendizaje, debate para la comunidad interesada en el talento. A través de historias, hacks, reflexiones.
Yo me leo a mí mismo para que no se me olvide lo que yo es que enseñaba. Sea fiel a eso que usted escribió y que reflexionó. Así.
A mí me han dado un par de consejos muy buenos, prácticos. Uno tiene que leer lo que escribe. Y hay otro que también es práctico, que no es tan filosófico, pero que también me ayudó mucho. Y es que a la gente hay que recibirla.
Y conversaciones con CEOs, líderes de talento humano, escritores, actores de cambio. Vas a recibir múltiples ideas para evolucionar como persona, como líder y para que tu empresa sea mejor.
Soñar y pensar en grande es exactamente igual que hacer soñar y pensar en pequeño.
Te invitamos a regalarte este espacio para ti, con conversaciones profundas y significativas que te harán pensar y te inspirarán a tomar acción. Únete a nosotros en este viaje para hackear el talento y juntos cambiemos el juego por lo humano, por un futuro fuera de serie. Our guest today is Lars Schmidt, an entrepreneur, podcaster, an author who writes for Fast Company and is a recognized figure in the HR world and also in the United States. I recently read his latest book, Redefining HR. Let's listen to this.
I think another would just be the nature of work itself is changing, right? I think that, the industrial era constructs of work that said work happened in an office and work was 9 to 5. And, those are no longer true. I mean, they are in some environments, but that's no longer the only way of working. So really kind of exploring more of the different hybrid kind of mechanisms of working and remote mechanisms of working. I cover that in the book, but obviously we're a couple of years beyond, the early days of the pandemic when that was written. And then another, I think, would just be the kind of expectations of the relationship between the employer and the employee. So, I think that we have long come to think of work as this mutual commitment where we may, get a job and be there for 4, 5, 10 years, a career maybe. And I just don't think that model of working is around anymore. I think the tenures are shorter. I think that, certainly employers are more bottom line driven. And so that allegiance to employees is less. And I think that employees have to adapt to that as well, as do HR professionals. How do you create, I love the model that Reid Hoffman laid out in his book, The Alliance. He's done a range of things, but one of them was being one of the co-founders of LinkedIn. And so he has a model in The Alliance called Tour of Duty. And basically LinkedIn has done this masterfully where, you're essentially hired in a 2-year role. And that is established clear and upfront on both sides at the beginning. And it's also clearly articulated, this is what you will get from us as an employee over the next 2 years. This is what we hope to get from you in terms of work product and deliverables and et cetera, et cetera. And at the end of the 2 years, we'll have a honest conversation. Like, is this still the right fit? Is this still the right role? Are you still the right person for us? Are your interests elsewhere? Are your skills elsewhere? Are our needs elsewhere? It's just having a very different but frank and honest conversation around that fit. And if it's not there on both ends, then you do what you can to help that person find somewhere that is a fit. And what LinkedIn has done a really good job of is they've done a lot of that internally. So they will move people around to different teams. And so you have a tour of duty in one function, and you may have a tour of duty in a completely different function 2 years later. And some of those may result in we're no longer the best place for you to grow and use your skills, but they just have a very honest conversation. I think a lot of that happens in the world of work without the honest conversation, right? It's kind of just like, we've kind of outgrown this person, or, they're struggling to keep up with the new manager. It's like, we just can't, for whatever reason, we're not inclined to just have a very frank and honest conversation on goals and alignment and kind of set those up front. So I think, especially when we're going to see more freelancers, more gig economy, more, consultants, we're no longer solely looking at how we deploy people from the lens of like a full-time job. There's other ways that you can get work done. Particularly, in the US, even globally in tech, where we've seen so many layoffs over the last 2 years. A lot of those companies were companies that just overhired, and they overhired full-time employees. And that doesn't have to be the case. And so I think we'll start to see more varied structures of how we deploy people to help solve business problems. And some of those will be full-time employees, some of those will be freelancers, some of those will be guilds, some of those will be outsourced. But I think that will be, a big part of this new future of work that we're building.
Before diving deeper into the discussion, it is important to get to know Lars better. He was born in New Jersey and moved to Florida at the age of 5.
Yeah, I was fortunate to have two amazing parents. I was born in New Jersey, moved to Connecticut, and settled in Florida, South Florida, when I was 5. So pretty much grew up in Florida. My dad was an entrepreneur. So he immigrated to the US from Germany when he was 18 to start a new life for himself. And had a range of different, careers and businesses over the years. Met my mother when he came to the States, moved back to Germany, had my brother, moved back to the States, had me. So my mother was a paralegal most of her career. When I was 5, she was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. And so she soon after couldn't work anymore. And, MS is a progressive degenerative disease. So, she was then home, and, by the time I was a teenager, she was, no longer had the use of her, arms and legs. So I spent a lot of, that time helping take care of her, as well. My father worked and my brother had left for the Navy. So, but both loving parents, taught me a lot about, integrity, taught me certainly a lot about work ethic. My dad, again, being kind of an entrepreneur, being somebody who moved to the US to find his American dream as an 18-year-old, he really instilled that in both my brother and I at an early age. So the moment I was in Florida, when I was growing up, you had to be 14 years old to work. That was the law. On my 14th birthday, he made sure that I was working. Actually, I was working at a grocery store bagging groceries, and he knew the manager there. So he actually pulled some strings with the manager to allow me to go through training off the books before I turned 14, so that literally on my 14th birthday, I would be working. And that was important to him, which, as a 14-year-old, I didn't really appreciate that, right? I was like, wait a minute. But looking back, I think it, certainly it shaped my own views towards, hard work and work ethic and commitments. And, I carry that to this day.
His childhood and teenage years were filled with skateboarding, Swatch watches, and movies. From his parents, he learned 3 key virtues: hard work, emotional intelligence, and kindness.
For sure. I mean, I think that where I took a lot of the hard work, kind of traits from my dad, I took a lot of, emotional intelligence and compassion and empathy, cues from my mom. I think the other kind of growing up in an environment like that where, your mom was sick and, you're also a caregiver as well for, years, especially at that young point in your life. Obviously, it was a very difficult thing to kind of go through as a child. But the positive of that is that I think that when you experience that kind of hardship at a young age, it gives you a certain appreciation for life that you might not have otherwise. So I think to this day, I don't sweat the small stuff. I don't get worked up over little details. It takes a lot to kind of get me upset or angry, and primarily because I know what hardship is. I've seen it. I've seen it, and my mom, even when she was a quadriplegic, so she had kind of really no use of her arms and legs, she still had a positive attitude, and she was so strong. And seeing her strength in the face of such difficulty was certainly it had a lasting impact on me as a child and as a grown up, an adult. Now, I think I don't think I would see the world the way that I do without having had that experience when I was young.
Lars had a famous dream: to go to Hollywood, to succeed in LA. Now, let's explore why and what led him to take a different path.
Yeah, well, I graduated high school. I went to college at Florida State University and studied marketing and international business. So, I always thought that with that, I would get into advertising. That's kind of what I saw as the path that I would take. But the only thing that I knew is that I wanted to move to Los Angeles. That was my goal. I'd always loved LA. There was a period of time I thought I wanted to get into acting. And so I thought, what better place to be than that? Those dreams quickly died once I actually lived there. But that was, for whatever reason in my mind, that was always the place that I wanted to go. And so we had a career fair my senior year in college. And there was only one company that came to the career fair that had an office in LA. And they happened to be a technical recruiting firm. And I had no idea what that even was. But I was like, but they have an office in LA. So let me at least, see what they're all about. And really liked the team, hit it off, ended up getting an offer, moved to New York for 6 months after graduation to do a training program with them, and then relocated out to Santa Monica to start my career.
He started his HR journey in recruitment and joined Ticketmaster in 2003 during a fascinating period of money, growth, and impact.
Yeah, it was, to this day, Ticketmaster was probably one of the most, formative experiences of my career. It was my first time moving into a leadership role. I had many firsts in my career there, and I love the company. I loved my team. I love the people I work with. Like, it was just, it was a really special place at that time. And so interestingly enough, like my boss, who was one of my mentors, she was grooming me to be her successor. And so at that time, I'd mostly run global recruiting. And so she gave me internal comm, she gave me performance, she gave me employee engagement, and a few other areas to kind of stretch me. And so when we announced the intent to merge with Live Nation, they didn't have anybody in internal comms. And so they just looked at our org chart and saw that I sat in, that was a box that sat under me. And they said, oh, great, you have somebody who does internal comms. He's going to do the internal comms for this multi-billion-dollar merger. And I literally created the function from the ground up 3 weeks prior. I had no idea what I was doing. And so they tasked me with that. And I said, okay, I'm going to figure this out. And I did. And I put together a proposal and they accepted it. And so I led that merger. But then after the merger went through, because their HR team was very flat, they only had one VP. They wanted to move me into PR to run internal comms. And I said, no, I'm not a PR guy. This is just one of the things that I do, but my interests are in HR and talent. And so they had relocated, my wife and I had moved from LA to Northern Virginia at that point. They moved us back for that stretch role. But luckily my wife had suggested to add a clause in my contract saying if my role was eliminated for reason other than cause, they would have to move us back to Virginia. So she's the smart one in the family, thankfully. So we did that, moved back here. And then, soon after I joined NPR as part of their National Public Radio here in DC, as part of their digital transformation to head up talent and innovation for them. So I did that for about 3 years before, kind of leaving corporate to start my own firm, Amplify Talent.
Transforma tu futuro hoy. ¿Estás lista? ¿Estás listo para ser esa persona líder que refine talento humano en tu organización? Recuerda, invertir en ti mismo, más que una decisión inteligente, es el acto más poderoso de liderazgo que puedes realizar. Y nuestra academia, Hackers del Talento LATAM, más que un programa de formación, es una inversión en tu potencial ilimitado. Una puerta a convertirte en visionaria, en estratega, capaz de impulsar el cambio, la innovación y adquirir las nuevas herramientas para transformarnos en este mundo tan tecnológico y tan humano. Te voy a dar 4 razones para que apliques cuanto antes a la Academia Hackers del Talento LATAM. 1. Formación de vanguardia. Aprende los mejores, porque es que nuestros profesores son vicepresidentes de talento, CEOs de renombre en América Latina, listos para compartir su experiencia y conocimiento y transformarse juntos contigo. 2. Conéctate con una comunidad de élite. Al unirte, te integrarás a una red de profesionales con ambición, con sueños, que enriquecen tu camino profesional y personal, con una gran experiencia laboral, que además probablemente se convertirán en buenos amigos tuyos. 3. Contenido revolucionario y actualizado. Nuestro currículo abarca temas clave para tu futuro, desde estrategia, antropotec, mindset para hackear el talento, liderazgo, impacto, influencia, conocimiento del negocio, analítica de personas, inteligencia artificial. Mejor dicho, te vamos a dar herramientas para que te posiciones y estés a la vanguardia en tu área, en people, en gestión de lo humano. Y por último, la experiencia educativa es de alto impacto. Nuestro enfoque innovador combina teoría y práctica, retos de transformación, coaching entre pares, acceso a cientos de contenidos asincrónicos y mucho más. Y al final, lo que estamos haciendo es garantizar un aprendizaje dinámico y profundo. Entonces, ahora es tu oportunidad para ser ese líder que guiará tu transformación en talento humano. Aplica a la corte número 5 de nuestra Academia Hackers del Talento LATAM. Es muy fácil. Ve a hackersdeltalento.com y ahí encontrarás toda la información para que te atrevas a hacer el cambio, a ser ese líder excepcional que el mundo necesita. El futuro del talento te espera. Comienza con la decisión de ser más, de impactar más. Invierte en ti y sé el líder del mañana. So, what is his business, Amplify Talent, all about?
So the business now, there's 2 core components. One is HR executive search, and then the other is a leadership development community that we run called the Amplify Talent Community. And so those are the 2 core components of the business. And then there's a bit of media wrapped around that. So I host a podcast in the LinkedIn podcast network called Redefining Work. I've written a few books on redefining HR and employer branding for dummies. Write for Fast Company, where I cover modern work practices. So, I try to get involved in initiatives that are accelerating innovation in HR and capabilities in HR. And so that tends to be the kind of, common denominator of the different projects that I get involved in.
So you remember how we started talking about the future of work and new trends. I want to connect this to Umberto Eco's book, Foucault's Pendulum. The pendulum itself is more than just a scientific instrument. It symbolizes the human quest for truth and order amidst chaos. Eco uses it to illustrate how people search for patterns and meanings in an apparently disordered world. One of the main lessons is a caution against how we interpret and attribute significance to events and symbols. An obsession with finding patterns can lead to erroneous and dangerous conclusions. The novel also highlights the peril of superficial knowledge. Yeah, the protagonists, despite being intelligent and well-educated, fall into the trap of their own inventions, underscoring the risk of misunderstanding and manipulation. Humberto encouraged a skeptical approach to theories and beliefs, emphasizing the importance of critical thinking and rigorous evaluation of evidence before accepting anything as true. So, now let's dive deeper into AI.
To be honest, I don't know that as an industry that we really grasp the magnitude of what is happening and what will very soon be happening as a result of, AI's adoption. This is the year where we're beginning to see roles impacted by AI. We're seeing more automation. You're seeing companies like Klarna be able to roll out AI customer service agents that can replace entire call centers. For the most part, those are hundreds of jobs, thousands of jobs that will be impacted. You're seeing companies like Cognition release basically developer AI tools that can code software or debug software and do some of those things that humans are doing now. You're seeing, with Sana, the new video platform that they haven't released yet for, OpenAI, that can create cinematic video based on text prompts. I mean, this is all happening now, and it's happening really fast. And I think for HR, we have got to be, my concern for us is that there are definitely risks associated with HR. There's bias, hallucination, confidentiality of information, right? We do need to have some policies and programs and consistent approaches around how we leverage these tools and think about using them. My concern is if we're not in the room when those policies are being developed, our voice is neutered. Right. And so now AI evolutioning is happening to us, not with us. And so we need to be leading those conversations. We need to be in those rooms. We need to be well versed in these different tools and how they could, bring, economies of scale and advantage and automation to our businesses, because those are very real, but also be able to be a voice for the risk. Because I feel like the current kind of evolution of generative AI, it's kind of a runaway train. Right now, there's no putting it back, and it's only feels like it's gaining momentum. So we have to be a part of that conversation in HR. We have to understand how we can use those tools. I mean, there's so many different use cases today where we can bring efficiencies to our work with generative AI. And so smart HR leaders are grasping those. They're leveraging that. They're using it in really clever ways. But they're, at an individual level and at a team level. But the really good ones, the ones that are making sure that they are involved at a policy level, at an organizational level on how they're going to use these tools. Because if they're not, that's going to be moving forward without our input, and that's going to be at our peril.
I believe that automation, which frees people from routine tasks, will be a net gain, as long as companies prepare and train their employees for future challenges. Obviously. So, do you agree or disagree?
Yeah, I mean, sadly, I can't fight with you on that one because I agree. But I think I'll take it a step further. I would say that there's a lot of things that we do today that certainly will be automated, right? Scheduling, administrative. You could train an LLM on your entire HR policy and programs and have a always on 24-hour global bot that can answer any employee questions instantly, right? That doesn't have to be us, and it shouldn't be us. That's a win for us, right? If we don't have to deal with all those emails and things that we're getting now, that we could just program, an AI agent to do for us. I do think you're right, though, that the human piece of what we do cannot yet be replicated by a machine. And so there's an empathy, there's a compassion, there's a strategy element as well. We also, it's important, I think, we connect not just the the human side, but also the business side, right? Like I think great HR leaders are great business leaders, and they understand like the impact of different tools like this to the business and like where human intervention will be necessary, where it won't be. But again, I think that the most important thing for us as an industry is that we are in those rooms, we are shaping those conversations, we are guiding those discussions, and we're doing it from a place of, understanding of the nuances of these tools and the capabilities and the risks. So we have to be informed. We can't just not know anything about them and then go to these rooms and be like, oh yeah, like AI is bad or AI is good. It's like there's a lot of nuance to AI, and we have to be able to grasp that and advocate for the people side of how we'll use those tools. And it equally is important where we won't use those tools. Both of those decisions are really important for business.
Before we continue, let me tell you that the applications for the LATAM Talents Hacker Academy are open. Yes, we train the future HR leaders of Latin America. Apply now. It's in Spanish. It's www.hackersdeltalento.com. There, we delve into one of the ideas we also propose. The future CEOs should have held roles in human resources. Here, it's why.
Her name is escaping me right now, but Chanel's CEO was Unilever's CHRO. She moved from that role, CHRO of Unilever, to CEO of Chanel. And that, I agree with you, but I also think it's interesting because we've seen the last couple of years, people moving into that CHRO role from other areas of the business, bringing that coveted business acumen into the function, which has been, great for our field and our capability. I do think a lot of those skills do transfer over, because when you think about the CPO today, it's one of the most complex jobs in the C-suite. Like, you have to know more than HR. You have to understand the financials. You have to understand the go-to-market strategy. You have to understand the revenue pipeline. You have to understand the, competitive threats to the business, in addition to having mastery of HR. So it is a very complex, complicated business role. And so certainly, those functional, technical, and leadership skills, I think will cross over well to CEO roles. So I expect we will see more of that. I agree.
What it's being discussed in the HR world nowadays? What conversation does Lars have with his guest on the podcast?
Yeah, I think, we're still seeing a lot of burnout in HR. We're having a lot of important conversations around mental health, and within that, like, what is our role and what is not our role as HR practitioners in supporting employees' mental health, right? Like, we're not psychologists. We're not really equipped to be like, have those deep mental health. We can connect them with resources. We can connect them with coaches. We can kind of gauge maybe what they may need and help them along that way, but we're not equipped to do that. And so, there is, I think we've seen an environment where there's more mental health conversations, but also issues, right? Like, going through a global pandemic has impacted society, right? We're now in a workforce with 5 generations of employees, right? Who think about mental health in different ways. And so, I had a conversation actually, so within our community, the Amplify Talent community, every month we do for Community Plus members. So it's a freemium model, but for people who are in the premium model, we do a monthly video chat called Pure Power Hour. And basically anybody can join. And it's just an open forum. We just talk about stuff that we're seeing, stuff that we're working through and navigating. And there's a lively conversation earlier this week in it about, one of the heads of HR was talking about how, they had some Gen Y employees. So like, first job out of college type employees. And, they were in a client meeting, and the client, they were in digital advertising space. So the client, they had a meeting and they said, hey, we kind of expected, what you sent doesn't really fit what we wanted. We expected to have like X, Y, and Z, can you revise it to include X, Y, and Z? And that triggered that employee to say that they're having a mental health crisis and they needed to go on leave because they got hard feedback from a client. And it prompted this whole conversation around like generational expectations around resilience and grit and mental health and like what constitutes a mental health crisis and does that differ by generation? How do you deal with a scenario like that? How are we equipped to say like, yes, you do or no, you don't, right? Like HR can't be the gatekeeper of deciding when somebody is or is not having a mental health episode. And so I think that those are just some of the kinds of things that HR is having to navigate now that, perhaps we hadn't, certainly at this scale in the past.
Let's understand the consequences we're still facing from COVID.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, look, it's interesting. Like when you go back, and I mean, it's going to be years before we kind of understand all the different impacts that COVID has had on society at large. But, one of the things is that in the the before time, the pre-COVID days, I think people, at least professionals, and I'm probably leaning a bit more towards like white collar professionals here, like knowledge worker types, but everybody kind of wore like, there's this like glorifying hustle and grind culture, right? Like we all lived to work and we worked long hours and we bragged about how busy we were, and then we went through this awful event where we're spending more time with our families or at home, or some of us didn't have families. They're isolated in their own, apartments and having to deal with the fallout from that. And I think for a lot of people, it recalibrated what their values were and what they saw as being important, and that work, it took work down a couple pegs on the importance, where it's like, well, my life is important. My interests are important. My hobbies are important. My mental health is important. Work is also important, but I'm not going to sacrifice all of these other things just for work. And I think, for many years before that, there were a lot of people who would make a lot of sacrifices for work, and they just expected to. That was kind of how they saw the employer-employee contract, right? When they, and I think, and this is partly, I think, all generations who went through that, but certainly younger generations, I feel like they are more likely to prioritize themselves over their employer. And I think that is healthy, but that's also something that we in HR and just in business generally have to adapt to. We're seeing this a little bit in tech right now, particularly in the US, where there's this kind of push to kind of get back to pre-pandemic notions of like working in an office and, doing away with all these employee perks that, we've accumulated over the period of the Great Resignation and everything else. And so it'll be interesting to see how this plays out. The more important thing is that employees have more choices now. So if you want to work 100% remote and you'll never go back to an office, you'll have that ability. If you want to spend some time in the office and some time at home, you'll have that ability. And some people hate working from home. They just want to work in an office. You'll have that ability. So I think that the lasting impact, it won't really be about hybrid or remote. It'll be about choice and flexibility.
And of course, longevity is a critical trend to consider in HR.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think the retirement age is changing, right? It's not like some people have to for financial reasons, right? And that's their own circumstances. Some people want to because they maybe don't have hobbies, maybe they don't have family, right? And that's kind of their social connection, is to be able to continue working. But there's a lot of I had a guest on the podcast. His name is Chip Conley, and he wrote a book called Learning to Love Midlife. And he's the founder of the Modern Elder Academy. But he has a lot of great views around like the wisdom of elders, as he plays. So basically, he was a hotelier who Airbnb's founders brought in to kind of be a reverse mentor to them as they were building Airbnb. And so they came up with a term for him, elder, which originally offended him, but then they kind of framed it as like, well, you have so much wisdom that we can tap into, and we want to basically, be able to harness that. And so, yeah, I definitely think that there is a role. I think on the other side, ageism is also real. I think that there is definitely bias against, older employees. And so that is something that certainly from an HR perspective, we also have to navigate.
I want to tell you about Chip Conley, who answers this question. What if the secret to being happier was simply getting older? It sounds absurd, but at 63 years old, I can say that the last few decades have been a tale of two midlives. One, very dark, from my 30s to 40s, and one truly splendid, starting when I hit 50. The number one reason? My emotional intelligence increased. And as I discovered while writing my book, Learning to Love Midlife, 12 Reasons Why Life Gets Better with Age, high emotional intelligence is a crucial ingredient for boosting happiness and resilience. That's what Chip Conley answered. Now, a few messages to all HR leaders in America.
Yeah, I mean, like a couple things. I think for one, it's really important when you're advocating for the advancement of HR that you're connecting it to the business results. Right. So I think that, one of the legacy knocks on HR is that we're more personnel, we're more administrative, we're not strategic. And, in old school HR teams, that is still true, but there are a lot of high performing, kind of what I call, progressive people teams that are essential to the business. And I think the way they get there is really, speaking the language of the business, being able to connect the programs that they're doing to business outcomes, being able to, speak about the finances, like a CFO, just being able to essentially position their work in a way that is helping the business become more successful and profitable through people. I think that that's an important story to be able to tell when you're looking to kind of advocate for the advancement of HR. And then it's spotlighting, companies that have been very successful and they've done it through innovative people programs, making sure as you are doing, you shine a bright light on them. You help other people see, because, again, you kind of look and somebody points to like a Google. Hey, Google is doing this, or hey, Amazon is doing this. And you tend to have these like big tech companies that people lock into, but like they're good at being able to tell stories of the impact of the people function on the business. And so to me, that's the biggest thing. It can't just be like employee happiness is high, right? Like that's an abstract concept that we shouldn't measure employee happiness to begin with, but that's a separate thing. But I think ultimately being able to convey the business impact of the function and how it is essentially a pathway to more profitability and more returns. I think that those things are really important in elevating the field, because we are a business function. We happen to be a business function that focuses on people, but we're absolutely a business function. And so we have to make sure that we represent ourselves in that way.
Let's be selfish. It's a critical hack. You should note it if you are in HR.
Yeah. So I think, the term selfish is provocative. I think obviously many people have a negative view of that term, but the way that I define it in this context is that, I think that for the majority of HR practitioners out there, we're very busy. The demands of our job are vast, they're dynamic. The nature of all of that work tends to pull our head down into our desk, right? So we're just doing, but we're not taking enough time for our own growth and our own development and our own learning. I mean, to me, the two biggest success enablers in today's world of work for HR professionals are learning agility and network equity. You have to have both, and you have to invest in both constantly. It's not just something you can like do for like a couple days a year. Like it has to be a constant focus, particularly on the learning agility. And so when I say being selfish, I think everybody listening to this right now, at a bare minimum, block an hour in your calendar every single week for learning. And that is when you read those articles or reports that your friends have sent you. That's when you listen to podcasts like this. That's where you do whatever you need to do within your industry and outside of it. You play with ChatGPT and different AI tools, but you need to have a dedicated time every single week to learn and to grow. And what I say in my kind of concept of being selfish is that no one's going to prioritize that but you. So whether you do or not is a choice. And if you choose to do it, you may view that choice as being selfish. But the reality is, if you're making time to learn, you are growing as an individual. That's making your own career more resilient. But you're also growing as a leader who can bring those new skills and knowledge to your employer. So you're benefiting, your employer is benefiting. So this notion of being selfish actually is the opposite. It's benefiting you and it's benefiting your employer. But you have to reframe how you think about, making time to learn and making it programmatic so that it's not just something where, we all have long to-do lists and we're all like, oh yeah, I'm going to, I saved that podcast. I'm going to get to it at some point, and some point never comes. And so if you're selfish with your time, if you're selfish with investing in your own growth and development, you have that block every single week that allows you to listen to that podcast. It allows you to read that article. And I think that piece is so important.
¿Alguna vez has sentido que puedes ser parte de algo más grande? En Hackers del Talento exploramos ideas y sobre todo trabajamos incansablemente por crear un camino hacia un mundo laboral más humano y próspero. Y lo sabes, tú eres parte crítica en esta misión. Imagina el efecto mariposa de compartir este episodio. Al pasar la voz a alguien que conoces, puede ser el catalizador de un cambio profundo en la vida de alguien más. Piensa en esa persona, alguien que como tú está listo para crecer y evolucionar. Compartir este episodio con ella no es solo un acto de generosidad, es un paso hacia la construcción de una comunidad más fuerte y unida. Únete a nosotros y sé parte de la vanguardia del cambio en el mundo laboral. Te puedes suscribir en LinkedIn buscando Hackers del Talento para descubrir diariamente aprendizajes del mundo del trabajo. Además, si ingresas a nuestra página web hackersdeltalento.com, te esperará nuestro newsletter Cartas al Talento, lleno de hacks y reflexiones semanales. Y recuerda, cada pequeña acción cuenta. Al unirte a nosotros, más que escuchar un podcast, estás activando un movimiento. Estás formando parte de una transformación global. Estamos aquí, listos para avanzar. Te quiero hacer una pregunta. ¿Te sumas a nuestra misión de transformar el mundo laboral en un lugar donde todos podemos prosperar? Pues bueno, continuemos juntos en este emocionante viaje y sigamos escuchando el episodio. Recuerda, tu presencia es el cambio. To wrap up, a few pieces of advice.
So one of the best pieces of advice that I ever got, and it pains me because I don't remember where I heard this from initially. So I wish I could cite this person, but I can't. But it's build a good name. And that tends to be, both like that and the making sure you invest in learning agility and network equity is advice I usually give to people. But the idea behind build a good name is that, you have one name and you can, this is another way of talking about integrity, being ethical, being kind, being helpful. But I think in this world, if you are mindful of building a good name, and that basically just means like you do the right thing. You try to be helpful, you try to add value rather than take it. You try to support people however you can and wherever you can. I think when you do that, then you build a fulfilling career because you're not taking shortcuts. You're not hurting people along the way. You're not stealing credit for other people's work and things like that. So I think build a good name is one that I always come back to.
Talking with Lars leaves us with several key hacks. Here are the top 3. First, be selfish in HR. Invest in your growth. Second, understand the role that all generations play in the world of work and design work environments tailored to each group. And last, freeing people from routine tasks will boost human creativity as long as we design the transition process correctly. See you on the next episode of Hackers del Talento.